Now we will hold questions for Gerard as he will be on the panel later this afternoon. Our next speaker, Georgina Snelling from AEMO, is an analyst within the AEMO forecasting team. In this role, Georgina develops long-term demand forecasts for the National Electricity Forecasting Report and National Gas Forecasting Report for use by government and industry to inform policy and investment decisions. Georgina currently leads the development of demand forecasts for large industrial energy users. Georgina has a bachelor's degree with honours in resource economics from the University of Sydney and has previously worked at Wood Mackenzie, a global energy and commodity research and consulting company, on projects predominantly relating to coal demand and supply. Please join me in welcoming Georgina.
Yep, thanks, Katie. So I'm going to talk to you today about our long-term forecasts for New South Wales that were produced in June this year as part of our National Electricity Forecasting Report. At AEMO, we're always trying to improve the quality of the forecasts and continuing to respond to changes in the market. So this year we've included for the first time some battery storage and electric vehicle analysis, and I'll touch on that during this presentation. But our main focus is the baseline forecasts for energy and for maximum demand, and that's what I'll mostly focus on today before touching on the impact of those emerging technologies. So what are we forecasting this year? Firstly, I'll talk about what we've seen in recent years and what that has translated to in terms of our forecasts, and then I'll briefly touch on how this compares to what we forecast in previous years. So as you can see, what we're looking at here is the energy consumption. So this is annual energy consumption from the network. The black line represents that consumption from the network, broken down by segment. So large industrial users are those greater than 10 megawatts. Residential commercial users are the remainder of the consumers. And above that black line, we see rooftop PV and energy efficiency, which offset some of that consumption that you would otherwise see from the network. So what we have seen, I'm sure everyone's aware of the falling demand from around about 2010-11. We've noticed that this has tapered off in more recent years, and in fact we saw an increase in consumption in New South Wales in the most recent financial year. This isn't unique to New South Wales. We're seeing this similar story across the NEM. And so what we're forecasting, or what we've noticed, this is because of two things. One, we've seen a stabilising in consumption from the industrial loads. We had a very high-profile closure of Kurri Kurri, and also some metal smelters, metal production curtailing. But in the last few years, we haven't seen any major announcements in this space. And in the residential and commercial sector, we've seen some increase in consumption, and our research and analysis suggests that this is mostly due to changes in the consumer behaviour. So whilst we saw a period of rising prices, consumers have sort of made the changes and responses that they were going to make at that time, and they're now settling into a new way of living. So what we're forecasting is that growth will remain fairly flat, and as Gerard included in his presentation, we're expecting there to be about 1% growth on average over the next 10 years. Growth in the large industrial sector will be fairly steady, not much growth in that sector. So most of that growth is coming from the residential and commercial sector. And the primary drivers for that, we're seeing that price pressure that we saw for the last 5 years has come off, and so there isn't going to be that downward pressure on consumption that we have seen. So therefore, the largest driver is going to be the population growth. Whilst we will see some growth in PV, again, as Gerard mentioned, we're not expecting that to be significant enough to offset that underlying consumption. Now, I'll just make the note that this chart doesn't include our forecast for battery storage or electric vehicles. This is just the consumption from the network, just with the offset of photovoltaics at this stage. So how does this compare to last year? The solid lines here represent our forecasts for 2015, and the dotted lines are our forecasts for 2014. We present as well the scenarios. So we use the high and low demand scenarios as stretching scenarios for what demand could be under different economic assumptions. And what you'll see there is that we're forecasting slightly higher growth than last year. This is for a number of reasons. Firstly, we're seeing a bit higher growth in the residential and commercial market. Again, as I said, because we're not expecting that price pressure to be as strong. And secondly, we have more optimistic GSP forecasts that we've used this year. And then the third thing, which is not as significant as the residential and commercial sector, but we are expecting there to be some growth in the industry sector, and that's due to a change in methodology. So in previous years, we've assumed that industrial loads either remain flat or will close. And this year, we tried to, particularly in the long term, account for the fact that some industries will experience some growth that we don't have any visibility of necessarily, particular projects at this stage. So we've tried to account for that. So that's the energy side of things. We look then at maximum demand. So maximum demand is the single point of highest demand on the network at any particular day during the year, and it is quite temperature dependent. So you see that also it looks like there's a dip and then an increase. It's more reflecting the fact that in 2014-15 was quite a warm year, and so the forecasts were reasonably high. The actual consumption was reasonably high. We're seeing that maximum demand will show the same trend as energy, so very gradual growth, mostly due to population. New South Wales is a little bit different to some of the other states. In some states, we're seeing that PV is actually eroding that maximum demand and also shifting the time of maximum demand during the day. But in New South Wales, the impact of PV is not large enough to offset or to significantly change the maximum demand. So we're seeing it follow a similar trend as with energy. So just to highlight that fact, looking on the right-hand side are the daily load profiles with and without rooftop PV. So comparing 2015 to 2025. The blue line there is the load on the network if we didn't have rooftop PV, and the orange line obviously with rooftop PV. And you can see that the rooftop PV is eroding energy use throughout the day, but it's not having an impact on either the time or the size of maximum demand, so still at 6:30 in the evening. On the left-hand side, I've provided a chart to show you our PV forecast. So as I mentioned, we're always looking to try and improve our forecast to respond to changes in the market, and we've had a particular focus this year on new technologies. So one of the first things we looked at was improving the PV forecasts. In previous years, we've only looked at residential PV, but this year we expanded our analysis to include the commercial PV. And what we're seeing is that there will be growth in both residential and commercial PV over the next 10 years. So moving on to look at emerging technologies. Firstly, looking at battery storage. Our initial analysis shows that tariff design is really going to be the key factor in determining uptake of battery storage. So the chart on the left-hand side shows you the average annual electricity consumption for different households based on different tariff and installation arrangements. So the largest benefit to users flows just by installing PV can reduce your electricity bill from around $3,200 a year to about $2,000 a year. The next biggest benefit flows by having a time of use tariff. But the largest, obviously, the most optimal arrangement in New South Wales is to have a time of use tariff with an integrated PV and storage system. And that means that consumers can charge their battery when electricity prices are low and then expend the battery when electricity prices are high. What we're forecasting in New South Wales is that with the current tariff arrangements, there could be up to 450,000 integrated PV and storage systems by 2035. And this could have the impact of reducing MD, maximum demand on the network, by about 2.4%. Compare that to growth in maximum demand. We're forecasting of about a total of 15% over that same time frame. We're not seeing at this stage that the storage will be enough to offset that growth in maximum demand. Bear in mind that these forecasts are based on current tariff arrangements and also don't take into account any potential network limitations or restrictions there might be in installing PV or storage systems. And lastly, just to touch on electric vehicles, we've done some initial analysis on what the impact of electric vehicles could be on the network. And we're seeing that by 2035, it could increase consumption by about 0.28%. This is just some initial analysis we've done. We've actually uploaded onto our website a template. You can play around and change the assumptions and see what the impact would be on charging profiles, on maximum demand, on an annual energy consumption. So finally, moving on to just my last slide. Thank you. We're continuing to look at how we improve the forecasts. Our current focus is looking at expanding our analysis on emerging technologies. We're also starting to look at the impact of minimum demand. At this stage, we've only looked at South Australia because of the high penetration of PV there. Starting to be some issues with reliability and network security. And so we've started with South Australia, but we are expanding that analysis across the network. So minimum demand is the lowest point of demand on the network at any particular time. But as I said, we're continuing to try and make improvements, and we're open to suggestions as to what we should be focusing on and including in our forecasts. And all the data from this presentation and for our forecast is available on our website. I'm happy to take questions.
So sorry, just again, please raise your hand if you do have a question. There is a roving mic. We will come to you.
Georgina, Pat Ganner from AusGrid. Sorry. Could I just clarify, one of your graphs up there had what looked like a summer peak, New South Wales load profile.
Yep.
Peaking at 6:30 p.m.
Yep.
Is that?
That's for a typical peak day, so not a typical day, a peak day.
6:30 p.m.
Yep.
Oh, I thought it was closer to 4 Eastern Standard Time, but no, that's not a winter profile. That's a summer profile there.
Yeah,
so.
it's a summer profile. Yep.
Okay. I always thought it was closer to 4 Eastern Standard Time. And sorry, the other thing you quite rightly mentioned is the impact of weather from year to year on peak demand.
Yep.
I can assure you it has the same impact on energy. So part of that reason for the increase in New South Wales load in 2015,
Yep.
was due to the fact that we didn't have summer or winter in 2013-14, but we did in 2015.
Yep.
So based on my calculations in the AusGrid region, the underlying growth was still negative in 2015 if you lift out the differences in the weather from 2 years. That's just an observation.
Yep. Okay, thanks for your comments. Are there any further questions?